You think you know the Roman Empire? Gladiators in the arena, senators in togas, the majestic architecture and the endless expansion of Rome. But buckle up, because what you don't learn in history books about these emperors will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, insanity, and decadence. Let's start with the three emperors who took the throne and then descended into madness, cruelty, and bizarre indulgence. These emperors didn't just rule, they twisted the very concept of empire into something so strange, it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's bedtime story. Caligula, the emperor who thought he was a god. By the end of his reign, Caligula did something no emperor had dared before. He declared himself a living god, not just someone with divine right to rule. He believed he was a literal god walking among mortals. And he didn't just stop at claiming divinity. He demanded the entire empire worship him. Statues of Caligula were erected throughout Rome, even in temples meant for other gods. Deny him worship, you were either executed or tortured. Caligula's cruelty went beyond the divine. Public executions weren't just punishments, they were spectacles. If anyone even slightly displeased him, they'd face gruesome deaths. But the torment didn't end with the condemned. Caligula would force their families to watch their loved ones die in front of them. He turned the most solemn moment into a twisted form of entertainment. But it wasn't just the common folk who were tormented. Caligula forced the Senate to bow to him like a god, begging for mercy, turning politics into a spectacle of power and humiliation. His paranoia knew no bounds. Even his own family was not safe from his rage. His sister, Julia Livilla, was accused of plotting against him and executed without mercy. Even more disturbing, her name was erased from history, a chilling reminder of his control over not just life, but legacy itself. Now, here's where things get truly bizarre. He didn't just sit on a throne. He made a mockery of Rome's politics. His horse, Incitatus, wasn't just an animal. He built a marble stable for the horse, decorated with a jeweled collar, and even held feasts in its honor. But that's not all. Caligula tried to make Incitatus a consul, the highest office in Rome. The message was clear. His power was so absolute even a horse could wield it. But he wasn't just about politics. His insatiable appetite for luxury matched his delusion of godhood. He lived a life of unrestrained decadence. Banquets, over the top, spending, out of control. His lavish lifestyle drained the imperial treasury, yet he continued to squander Rome's wealth on ridiculous luxuries and performances. Caligula's reign wasn't just about indulgence, it was ruled by paranoia. He feared betrayal at every corner. Spies were everywhere, even among his closest allies. He kept armed guards by his bed, slept with loaded crossbows, and never trusted anyone, not even his own children. He thought everyone was plotting against him, and his obsession with assassination led him to execute people based on dreams or imagined betrayals. The madness extended to the Roman games. These weren't just contests of strength or bravery, they were twisted performances for Caligula's amusement. He'd force slaves to fight gladiators and take part in bizarre rituals. At times, he personally engaged in the violence, turning the arena into a playground of death. As insane as his reign was, it ended in a way that felt almost inevitable. After years of brutality, his own guards stabbed him 30 times and the people of Rome breathed a collective sigh of relief. But that wasn't the end. The legacy of his madness lingered far beyond his death. His reign turned Rome upside down. The Senate was reduced to a puppet institution, and the people who lived under his rule were left terrified of the emperor's temper. His reign marked the corruption of Rome's political system and drained its wealth through his decadence and paranoia. Caligula's name lives on as the embodiment of tyrannical madness. His obsession with power, his delusions of grandeur, and his endless cruelty set a dangerous precedent for future rulers. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a nightmare. His actions became a grim symbol of what happens when absolute power is placed in the hands of a madman. Nero, the emperor who played the fiddle while Rome burned. It's July of 64 AD, and Rome is burning. The fire ravages the city for 6 days, leaving much of it in ruins. The people are terrified, their homes and lives destroyed. So, where was Nero? Nero wasn't just avoiding the flames, he watched it burn from his palace. Some say he even sang a song about the fall of Troy as the city went up in smoke. Imagine this. As people screamed and fled, Nero was enjoying the view from his luxurious palace. The image of him fiddling or playing his lyre during the fire became the symbol of his absolute detachment from the suffering of his people. But the truth is darker. Nero was rumored to have started the fire himself, hoping it would clear the way for his grand building projects. As Rome burned, he blamed the Christians. This was his scapegoat, a group that was already marginalized, and he turned the flames into an excuse for a brutal crackdown. In the aftermath of the fire, Nero needed someone to blame. And what better target than a small, unpopular religious group? He accused the Christians of starting the fire, leading to one of the most horrific persecutions in Roman history. Nero's cruelty reached its peak as he used Christians as living torches, setting them on fire to light his gardens at night. But the torture didn't end there. Some were fed to wild animals, others were forced to participate in gruesome gladiatorial games. Nero's paranoia and need for control led him to treat a peaceful community like an enemy, and he was willing to go to extreme lengths to wipe them out. Nero wasn't just an emperor. He was a living legend in his own mind. He had a craving for adoration, constantly seeking the approval of the people, not for his leadership, but for his performance. He fancied himself a poet, actor, and charioteer, and, believe it or not, forced the people of Rome to watch him perform in these roles. Imagine being trapped in a theater, listening to your emperor recite poetry, or watch him in a chariot race, unable to escape. And if anyone dared to criticize him, well, that was treason. His obsession with his public image led him to punish anyone who didn't show the proper admiration. He just concerned with maintaining his image. He was terrified of anyone threatening his power. Paranoia took over his reign. He executed those closest to him, including his mother Agrippina, who he had murdered in cold blood after she tried to influence his reign. Then he had his wife Octavia killed when he grew tired of her, only to marry a young boy who he forced to dress as a woman. Nero's fear of betrayal spiraled out of control, and he executed anyone he suspected of plotting against him, whether they were guilty or not. While the empire was crumbling and people were dying in the streets, Nero's obsession with luxury and excess kept him detached from reality. His palaces were extravagant, his feasts were wild, and his spending was so out of control that it drained the Roman treasury. He indulged in lavish parties, often with the highest-ranking officials, while Rome itself bled. Nero lived in a bubble of decadence and delusion, hosting grand celebrations while his people starved and suffered. His need for excess didn't just affect the common people, it threatened the very foundation of Rome itself. But the fiddling emperor's time came to an end. His paranoia and cruelty eventually caught up with him. Nero's reign became unbearable, and in 68 AD, the Senate declared him an enemy of the state. Faced with a rebellion and no allies left, Nero committed suicide, marking the tragic end of one of history's most tyrannical rulers. Even in death, Nero's reputation was so toxic that his legacy was erased from Roman history. His name was condemned, and the Senate sought to distance the empire from his madness. But the damage was done. Nero left behind a legacy of destruction, cruelty, and decadence that would haunt Rome for generations. Elagabalus, the boy emperor who shocked Rome to its core. At just 14 years old, Elagabalus was thrust into power after being declared emperor by his grandmother. His reign was a complete departure from Roman norms. Elagabalus wasn't a warrior or a ruler. He was a religious zealot, and his actions were driven more by his obsession with the god Elagabal, the deity he had been named after. This led to some of the most bizarre, extravagant, and corrupt events in Roman history. From the moment he came to power, Elagabalus made his worship of the sun god Elagabal central to Roman religion, even replacing Jupiter, the king of Roman gods, with Elagabal as the supreme deity. To make his vision a reality, he had a huge black stone of Elagabal transported to Rome and placed in a grand temple. His devotion went so far that he had rituals performed daily in front of the stone, including dances, animal sacrifices, and orgies, to appease his god. The emperor's obsession with Elagabal led him to demand that all of Rome follow his strange religious practices. He didn't just worship Elagabal, he married the god in a public ceremony. In a grotesque act of personal devotion, Elagabalus married a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to celibacy, and forced her to participate in his bizarre ceremonies. He also had a marriage to a woman named Aquilia Severa and a teenage boy named Heracles, parading around in extravagant religious rituals, emphasizing extreme indulgence and non-Roman customs. This was not only a scandal, it shocked Roman religious traditions, setting him apart as a ruler who was not only defying political norms, but spitting on Rome's ancient religious customs. His behavior was so extreme that he disregarded the Senate entirely. He would humiliate the Senate in public and treat them as mere pawns. This reached its peak when he appointed a chariot driver as a consul, reducing the highest office in Rome to a joke. He also went to great lengths to create chaos among the aristocracy by offering his nobles lavish rewards for their loyalty, only to discard them once they were no longer useful. The Senate, once a symbol of Roman tradition, became a mockery under his reign. Elagabalus's reign was also marked by excess in every aspect of life. He held massive feasts that featured foods so extravagant Rome could not sustain it. He would spend an obscene amount of money on luxury goods, including lavish baths, golden plates, and enormous quantities of perfume. He also indulged in some truly grotesque eating habits, roasting entire ostriches, using wild game meats, and hosting parties where dancing girls performed while the guests dined on strange and costly foods. Elagabalus was notorious for his sexual escapades, which went beyond the typical excess of Roman emperors. He openly engaged in relationships with both men and women, but his behavior was seen as so excessive and scandalous that it shocked even the notoriously indulgent Roman elite. One of his most famous exploits was his sexual relationship with a male charioteer, which he openly flaunted. The emperor also reportedly tried to force high-ranking nobles to engage in sexual acts with him, ensuring that his rule was not only a physical indulgence, but a power play over the elites. Parties under Elagabalus's rule were not just about food and drink, they were extravagant theatrical performances, where the emperor would invite guests to indulge in the most extreme forms of entertainment. At one famous feast, Elagabalus served dishes that were designed to overwhelm the senses, including plates that were so large they could feed entire households. His parties were notorious for their indecency, where guests ate, drank, and engaged in bizarre rituals at the emperor's command. Perhaps the most infamous story about Elagabalus's reign involves his infamous Golden Hail Party. He allegedly ordered the release of tons of gold coins onto his guests during a lavish banquet. The guests were buried in gold, literally drowning in the wealth they once cherished. However, the heavy coins caused injuries to those attending, leading to an incident that marked Elagabalus's complete detachment from reality and Roman dignity. Elagabalus's reign was short-lived, lasting just 4 years, as his reign of excess, decadence, and religious fervor alienated everyone. The Roman military was the first to turn against him, led by the Praetorian Guard, and soon after, the Senate declared him a tyrant. Elagabalus was assassinated by his own guards in 222 AD, and his body was dragged through the streets, symbolizing the fall of the most bizarre ruler in Roman history. His successor, Severus Alexander, had Elagabalus's name damned and erased from history to make sure the legacy of his reign of terror and indulgence would never be remembered. These emperors weren't just madmen. They were symbols of absolute power gone wrong, turning their empires into nightmares of excess, paranoia, and cruelty. Caligula, Nero, and Elagabalus ruled not just with fear, but with a complete disregard for human life, dignity, or sanity. So, the next time you think of the Roman Empire, remember, the rulers of Rome weren't just titans of civilization, they were monsters who twisted the very fabric of power until it snapped. The emperors who once sat at the top of the world ended up burning it all down in their own madness. Hit that subscribe button if you want to dive deeper into the most horrifying truths history conveniently ignores. Trust me, you haven't heard anything yet.